Hello, my name is Eric Roberts, and I am with EHI Consultants. Most of you know me from the Portsmouth Site Specific Advisory Board, where I've been working for the last 13 years with the Department of Energy and the local counties, Pike, Scioto, Ross, Jackson, as we work to collectively find balance and progress on the cleanup of the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant. Let me welcome you tonight to this first of what will be several. This is actually the second night of our first informational exchange in this virtual platform, focusing on the environmental data associated with the environmental restoration, the decontamination and decommissioning of the former A plant, and the eventual cleanup of the project here at the Portsmouth DOE site located in Piketon, Ohio. So a couple things as we get going tonight. One, Donnie, if you want to go ahead and share the slides, got it. Perfect. Thanks, buddy. Hey, if you haven't already done so, let me encourage you to jump over to portsvirtualevent.com, portsvirtualevent.com, and there's a spot there where you can download tonight's presentation. So if you have that ability, it'll give you a PDF. It's a small file. You can drop it to your phone or your laptop, whatever device you're using, and you can follow along with the slides in front of you. Might be a little easier for you to track the slides because there's some really great information on there we want to make sure you have. Two, we want to make sure that you're engaged with this and that this is a dialogue and not just a one-way street, even though it's a virtual platform. So there are multiple ways where you get the opportunity to provide us feedback and questions. First, you can always submit questions. Ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov, right? So that's been open for a couple days. It'll be open for several days after tonight, for actually probably close to the end of the year. So feel free to submit questions there to the ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov, right? Second way you can provide us questions and we'll address those is through the streaming platforms. So on YouTube, there is a chat feature. On WebEx, there is a chat feature as well. And we would love, as we go through tonight's presentations, if there are things we need to clarify, if there are questions you have, if you can just throw those in the chat, that'd be a great way for us to track what you're thinking, and we'll address those at a Q&A at the end of the presentations. As a matter of fact, since we're here right now, why don't we take just a second and let's test out the chat functions. So I know the virtual platform allows us the opportunity for people to participate from not just the local area surrounding the A plant, but from across the country. So if you'd be so kind, if you could throw your name and where you're from into the chat feature, so we can get a sense of where we're reaching, and we can just make sure the chat's working for all of you as well. So your name and where you're from into the chat feature, that would be really helpful. Boom, just like that. Okay, so we want to make that. Also, fourth way for you to participate tonight after the presentations, we'll answer the questions that came up relative to the presentations on the D&D and the air quality and the data that's coming from the current cleanup project. We're going to have a public comment section, right? So the chance for you to verbally express your comments and share with us. So you can stick around for that if that's what you want. It's probably going to be about an hour and 20 minutes here based on what we saw on Tuesday night. And speaking of Tuesday night, hey, you see the stream from Tuesday night's presentation, which this is going to be a very similar. There's one small tweak to a slide for clarification, but it's going to look very similar. Had 220 views on the posting of Tuesday's meeting, so we're really excited about that. See some of the same names up in the chat feature, but also see some new names and seeing the participants list. So we're glad to have you this evening. Okay, so let's talk about the agenda for tonight. What's on the table? What are we going to talk about? We're looking at the X326 building at the Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant, right? So the 326 building was a really large, and we'll get into this in more detail, it's a really large process facility where they use gaseous diffusion to enrich uranium, right? So now it's kind of outdated technology, and it's time for that building to come down. And we're going to talk about that process, how it's coming down, and in particular, the air quality and how we know it's coming down in a way that's safe for the workers and for the public. We have three speakers that are going to be leading us through our presentations tonight. First, we have Jeff Bettinger with the U.S. Department of Energy at the Portsmouth site. Jeff's the DOE site lead. He's going to give us a little bit of site overview, a little bit of the cleanup update, and then talk to us about the 326 project in general, how it rolls. He's going to hand it over to Dr. Kathy Higley. Dr. Higley is a renowned radiation health and risk expert, and she's going to talk about um, kind of what this has to do and put the cleanup project in terms of a public health and a worker health scenarios, so we understand what are the real risks that we're looking at, and what are the precautions being put in place to protect us. And then we're going to follow up with Frank Johnston, who is the floor BW Portsmouth. He is the Director of Environmental Protection, and he's going to give us an update on the collection and real-time data that's being collected with the air monitors around the site that ensures that the workers and public are protected, and this is a safe project. So with that being said, we want to make sure that throughout this process that we maintain, and we're committed to you, and we hope that you're committed to us, to be courteous and respectful of one another, that we honor each other's time, and that we make sure that we're being as productive and efficient as we can, and that we make sure that all participants get a chance to be heard. With that being said, for the majority of the meeting, you will be on mute. All participants will be on mute except the speakers. That protects the stream of audio that's coming through and gives us a better sound quality. We will open up the microphones for public comment at the end of the night. So, just anything else we need to cover? You know how to throw your questions in the chat box as we go. We will collect those throughout the night, and then we'll take a short break after this set of presentations. Let our speakers grab a sip of water, stretch their legs. We'll come back, we'll ask your questions and see what they can answer for us, and we can go from there. Now, one quick caveat as we get started. Tuesday night, we did have a couple of small technical issues, right? If you've ever streamed a TV show on Netflix or any other streaming network, you know sometimes it catches and it pauses or it times out, and you just have to refresh and start again. Well, we had that happen to us on Tuesday night. We think we have fixed that problem, so it's not going to be an issue. But in the event that it does happen, right, the YouTube stream will continue. You'll see a technical difficulty sign flash up, but we will continue to keep that. There's no need to refresh YouTube. If you are viewing on WebEx, we will refresh it. It takes less than 30 seconds. It is immediate. Everyone populates back in, and we're good to go, right? So that you're not going to see, we don't lose anyone unless you choose not to come back. So with that being said, we're going to start the night off with Mr. Jeff Bettinger, and he's going to kick off our presentations. Jeff, you there, sir? We probably need to unmute you, don't we?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Eric. Can everybody hear me, or can anybody hear me? Okay, very good. All right. May I have the next slide, please? All right, thank you. This is just a little bit on my background. As you can see, I have a lot of experience in a lot of varied different situations. A lot of experience in the deactivation and demolition of some very hazardous facilities. I've dealt with medical waste, chemical weapons material, hazardous material, and nuclear facilities. And all of those things have given me experience that I can bring to bear that, helps to ensure that we're doing this as safely as possible. May I have the next slide, please? I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an overview of what's going on in the site and how we're working forward, and then how we plan to develop the plan for the monitoring and the engineering controls that we use associated with this demolition activity. And so some of this may be familiar to some of you who have been around for a while, but it's always good to refresh ourselves. This overview of the site here shows the industrial area. It's a little over 1,000 acres, part of the nearly 4,000 acre federal reservation. The area that you see there, it's got a road that runs around it. We call that perimeter road. It's about 7.5 miles. This is just to give you a perspective of scale. And you see those three large buildings, the one with the white roof, and then the black roof is actually two buildings that go the length there. Each of those is about 30 acres. Yes, 30 acres. And that's where the bulk of the processing activity occurred for enriching uranium. In addition to those three large buildings, we have 400 other structures and facilities. It's almost like a city. We have our own fire department, we have our own police force, we have a water treatment plant, sewage treatment plant, laboratories, maintenance shops, vehicle maintenance shops, just all kinds of things, warehouses. And we started cleanup of this site in approximately 1989 and have been working towards that since then. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, we do have a plan and we are working towards it. What we're going to do is we're starting with the process buildings. We want to get those down. They're large, they take a long time to take down, and we're able to build the on-site waste disposal facility where we're going to put the debris from demolition in from these large process buildings, and they'll take up the bulk of that. We're building 10 cells at the on-site waste disposal facility with the option to build 2 more if we need it. And basically, it takes 3 of those waste cells for each of the process buildings. And we're starting with a 326 building. We've been working on deactivating that for a while and just started demolition of it. You'll see some photographs of that. And you also saw some in the slide presentation at the beginning. After that, we're going to take that skilled workforce that's operating the equipment to do that and move to the 333 building, which we're in the process of deactivating now. When we deactivate a building, what we do is remove the radiological and hazardous materials from the building. In the 326, for example, we remove process equipment and all the asbestos. We'll be doing that in other buildings, although not necessarily all of the process equipment. Some of it will be able to go into the on-site waste disposal facility. The 326 was unique in that respect. But then we'll move to the 333, then the 330, and then we'll work on the balance of plant. And we're constructing the on-site waste disposal facility in parallel with this. May I have the next slide, please? This is a great shot showing the 326 process building demolition. It's really kind of neat that we can get drones and come in and get good perspectives and photographs of this. I mentioned to you we completed the deactivation in September of last year. What that means was that all of the hazardous material had been removed from the building, and over 94 or over 93% of the radioactivity, the radiological materials, have been removed from the building. We did put together an extensive demolition design plan that was approved by Ohio Environmental Protection Agency in February of 2021. And once we got the approval for that demolition design plan, we started removing the transite. Transite is the material that basically encloses the building. It's you saw some pictures of it in the beginning. It's like large sheets of corrugated, it's almost like corrugated plywood, only it's an asbestos containing material. We don't want to do demolition with asbestos there because that creates asbestos dust. So we remove all of that material and package it up, and it goes into the on-site waste disposal facility. You do see, or you will have seen that before we removed all that material, it was a bright blue. And that's because we sprayed fixative on it. And fixative is a material it's really a souped up paint that's used to contain any dust and debris that could come off. It's widely used in the nuclear industry and in other industries to control dust before demolitions occur. Once we remove the transite, we cover it. If you go by it now, you'll see a bright blue netting on it. And we put that netting up there to prevent birds and things like that from going in there and nesting, and also to prevent anything from coming out of the building that may blow out of there, although we have removed all the material from the building, any loose material. We sprayed the entire interior with fixative. And in fact, once we remove the transite, we also spray fixative again from the outside, just to make sure that there are any areas that we may have missed covering with a fixative, they're covered. We started structural demolition of the facility in May of 2021. And this is the result of several months of structural demolition of what you see here. And when we do the structural demolition, you can see this yellow iron up in front of it. That's the term we use for it, yellow iron. They're excavators, they're long reach excavators that are standard equipment with large shears on the front of them that basically will go in there and just cut the material up, because the bulk of what we're dealing with is structural materials. There's a lot of concrete from the floors with rebar in it that we're segmenting. There's a lot of I-beams, structural materials like that. There's a lot of switch gear. We removed all of the PCBs and asbestos-containing transformers and things, and switch and circuit breakers out, and we're cutting those up so that they meet the waste acceptance criteria to go in the on-site waste disposal facility. And we have people here that are monitoring. You see these piles on the pad. This is where these structural components come down, and then they're processed, basically size reduced, they're sheared to meet the waste acceptance criteria. And it's being monitored there to ensure that it does. I want to point out a couple of other things on here, and that is these items that have a blue handle on them. They look almost like extended arms or like man lifts. Those actually have foggers at the end of them, and water is our friend when we're doing this work. We use foggers to disperse water in the air. It's a lot better than using fire hoses. Sometimes you'll go by demolition activities and they'll just have fire hoses that they spray on it. But these are much, much more effective. It's state of the art in industry to use these types of things. And in fact, these are very unique in that they're able to move and they're remote controlled, so that there's actually a little red booth that's far away from the site, but visibly within it. And that operator can direct that unit in there and also direct the fog so it's being sprayed where it needs to be to keep the material underneath it. In addition, we also spray fixative on this, certainly at the end of the day, to immobilize all the materials. And in fact, for that, we use a more hefty fixative, and we actually even use a hydroseeder to apply that because the material is thicker. Right now, you're looking at this. It's showing almost 2 of the sections down. The building has 10 sections, and we're on schedule, and our plan is to complete 4 of the 10 sections in 2021 by the end of the calendar year, and complete this demolition by the end of the calendar year in 2023. May I have the next slide, or actually early in 2023. May I have the next slide? Okay, good. When we take this material out there, you saw it there on the pile, and it's a lot of irregularly shaped material. We're taking it, as I mentioned to you, and we're putting it in an on-site waste disposal facility. Well, we need to fill in all the voids around that, and we compact it because the on-site waste disposal facility, the material that's in there needs to be structurally sound, because it's going to be in there for the long haul, and we want it to be as stable as possible. And so what we're doing, and this is actually something that is the result of community input, is that on the site there are several plumes, which are contaminated soil from industrial solvents that are on site. And you can see on the right-hand side here, there's the orange line that shows you perimeter road, and inside you see some purple areas, and then also a couple of few yellow areas that are inside there. We're going to be digging up those areas, and the soil is suitable for us to use as what we call engineered fill. And so right now we're currently pumping groundwater from underneath those plumes and treating it to remove the organic solvents that are in it. But what we're doing here is we're actually going to remove the source by excavating that soil. And so and we're using that as engineered fill. We use about 2.4 cubic feet of soil for every cubic foot of debris that we put in the on-site waste disposal facility. You see in the center picture some of it being transferred into the on-site waste disposal facility. It's a real win-win for the community because what happens at the end is that when we take all the process buildings down, it leaves you a large site available for reuse. There are no areas that people can't dig in, so that if you want to put foundations in for another industrial facility for reuse, it's entirely suitable for that. May I have the next slide, please? I talked to you a few times about the on-site waste disposal facility. This is another overhead shot of it. I also spoke to you about the transite that we took off, and I said that we package it up and then put it in the on-site waste disposal facility. That was the first waste that we placed in the on-site waste disposal facility. You can see it there. It's actually wrapped up. That's because it's asbestos-containing waste. And we use that and then put it in as a bottom layer in the on-site waste disposal facility in several grids, and then put soil on top of it, and then the debris goes on top of it. But let me talk to you a little bit about the photos that you see here, this drone shot of the on-site waste disposal facility. On the left-hand side, you see cell one. We completed construction of that last year, and it is currently accepting waste. You can see that there's the entire cell is active because you can tell by the soil in there. Some of those are grids that are closed up. We call the area where we place the debris a grid, and it's all cataloged so we can keep track of the material that goes up there. So we know which grid each truckload of material goes into. You can see the darker brown areas. Those are active grids that they're working, where they're taking the debris in there and they put it in place, and then they're compacting it and putting soil on top of that and recompacting it to work it. We have dust control at the on-site waste disposal facility, similar to what we do at the structural demolition, and we also have monitors in the area. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see cells 4 and 5. The liner construction is underway. The liner is really the key part of it's what makes this a very special engineered landfill. You can see I have a diagram in here of the liner system. What you see in here, and you're looking at the picture, is the actual the secondary liner, which is on the bottom. We've excavated the hole, and we put in a clay liner, and then what we've done is we're putting in the secondary liner, and above that we put a leak detection system, which is piping that will detect any leaks that go through the primary liner, which is put above that. And we're in the process of installing those liners. Ohio EPA has a representative that comes out here on a weekly basis monitoring this. They review all the quality control documents from the leak checks. I can tell you that each stage of the liner, the secondary liner and the primary liner, undergo multiple leak checks to ensure that the liners have integrity. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. So I talked to you a lot about what we're doing out there, but how did we get to the point to where we decided to do that? Our integrated safety management system, which is the way that we approach things here in the department, tells us to first look at what we're going to do and try and determine all the potential hazards, all the things that could possibly go wrong. We do that based on our knowledge of doing it, but the most important thing that we do is we incorporate lessons learned from experience at other DOE projects. And as I mentioned to you before, I've got varied experience. I bring that to the table, and a lot of our other folks that are working here do that also, and are able to bring their experience, and also subcontractors bring their experience, like our demolition subcontractor. They bring their experience to the table, and we try to identify everything that could possibly happen. First thing that we do is we remove hazards so that we don't have to worry about them when we're doing the demolition. And that's what we did in the deactivation. Took all the asbestos out, the bulk of all of the process equipment, a lot of the piping, did extensive measurements to ensure that any material left in there was safe to go into the on-site waste disposal facility from a radiological point of view. And we had numerous times when we walked down the building just to look for things and that we may have missed when we're doing it. And all this stuff is extensively documented. And it's also discussed, any of the other things that we've done are contained in that demolition design plan that I told you Ohio EPA reviewed and approved. We bring in a trained, experienced workforce. Our demolition subcontractors are highly trained, and they've done this work before at other sites. As I mentioned to you before, we use the foggers, things like that, as opposed to, they're industry proven, state-of-the-art protective measures. May I have the next slide, please? Anything that we can't remove as a hazard, we engineer engineered controls. Many times these are based on lessons learned, sometimes based on common sense and lessons learned. for one thing that we had was a lesson learned related to water. We knew that we'd be using a lot of water. We knew that this was a 30-acre slab at some point that would be open, and that even rainwater going on it had the potential to take contaminants off it. And so what we did is we built a berm around the entire 30-acre slab. And this berm collects all the water that runs off of it, the water that we apply as we're fogging it, as you can see in that photograph, and then other water that may come from rainwater. We collect that and we take it over to a facility that is purpose-built to treat this water. This is a part of it. This is the outside where the preparatory work is done on the water before it goes in there. Inside that structure that you see there, the white structure, we have chemical treatment, ion exchange, carbon filters, various processes that are designed specifically for the contaminants of concern to process that material that's in the water. And then once that's done, we're able to discharge that water to one of our permitted outfalls. And we're constantly sampling and monitoring that to make sure that that's working well. In addition, I talked to you about, the control of debris, control of dust. If we control dust, that should control things from going off the site because it's going to go off site as dust. When I say off site, off of the perimeter of the slab that we're working on. We constantly monitor the wind speed. We have a tower on site that we use. We have an operator that's constantly monitoring it. Frank's going to talk a little bit more about some of the restrictions that are associated with that. And in addition, we also have put a network of air monitors in there. Can I have the next slide, please? Several types of air monitors, in fact. We've got real-time project monitors. Frank's going to give you a lot of talk about that. He's going to explain that to you, and he's going to show you some of the results that we get from that. In addition, something that I'm very proud of is that we've actually worked with Ohio EPA and ODH and have co-located a network of air monitors on site. These monitors are in conjunction with our existing monitoring system that we put in place that monitors the site perimeter, both on-site and off-site. And we've put every place where we had a monitor, we put an Ohio Department of Health monitor next to it. In addition, we identified 5 new locations where we put a monitor with the Ohio EPA and DOE in. And those OEPA monitors are monitoring for asbestos, organic materials, particulate matter, PCBs, and those types of materials. And with that, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Dr. Higley, who is going to talk to you about managing risk, and then we'll go to Frank, who's going to talk to you in more depth about those monitors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So as was noted, my name's Kathy Higley, and I am a professor in the College of Engineering at Oregon State University in the School of Nuclear Science and Engineering. And I've been working with radioactive materials for more than 4 decades. The kind of work I do focuses primarily on radioactivity movement through the environment and how it affects people and other organisms. And you can read a little bit about my bio here if you want to learn more about it. Next slide, please. So we're going to be talking about air monitoring and managing risk, and the point I wanted to convey is that risk varies depending on sort of where you are, what you're doing. If doing it for work, for recreation, or for just living at home, and within employment, risk is managed in part by regulations and standards and laws and engineered controls. Think things like speed limits and requirements for brakes and load limits on trucks and such. In recreation, there's a little bit more of a choice, although the hand of government is still there. They used to have the ATVs with a lot more choices than they do now, but safety resulted in some design changes. And in home life, you try to manage your risk, but again, there is some level of standards and regulations, seat belts, airbags, and speed limits. So we're going to talk a little bit about how these sorts of risks factor into what's going on at the site. Next slide, please. So as Jeff pointed out, they're in the process of decommissioning and dismantling a number of facilities, and there's a lot of focus on air emissions from the site. Next slide, please. Next slide, Donnie. Thank you. So there's a different visions and versions of what this site is going to look like when ultimately demolition is complete. But the point is, taking down facilities, requires building decontamination, knocking them down and removal, and you have to be focused on the potential hazards that occur during that process. Next slide. So how do you achieve your input of reuse of this particular facility? Well, there are requirements. There are standards for protection of the workers, the public, the environment. So all of these laws and regulations limit, constrain the potential risk to the public from not only the activities during demolition and decontamination, but ultimately the final product. And the process, Jeff mentioned how this is a very involved effort and that there's a lot of time taking to reviewing the site, understanding what the potential hazards are, planning, and then planning again. And one of the things that we will talk about today, Jeff has mentioned it, Frank is going to talk about it, is making sure that you have monitoring locations that are situated so that they can actually track what potential releases are occurring. Once you've established these, then you go through your process of, you're decontaminating, decommissioning, and deconstructing, and then ultimately releasing for redevelopment. Next slide, please. So how do you know where to put your air monitors? Because you're interested in making sure that you monitor for any airborne releases off the site. And one of the things that they do, and again, Jeff mentioned this, was that they have a meteorological tower, and you can monitor the wind speed, the direction, um, over time, and you can develop what's called a windrose. And the left-hand side of this picture shows an annual windrose. It basically just tells you the percent of the time the wind is blowing from a particular direction and what the wind speed is. And so the frequency, the direction, the speeds allow you to get an understanding of what the wind is likely to look like in the next year, and you can lay out proactively where your air sampling stations are going to be. So you place your monitors based on not only the type of work, but you consider what the major wind directions are, and also, you want to be focused on worker health and safety. And so the right-hand side just shows a site map with some of the locations, and Frank will talk more about this in his presentation. Next slide, please. So they're looking for potential radioactive releases as well as particulate releases. So I'm going to take each of these separately. One of the types of detectors that they use for monitoring for airborne radioactivity is something called an ICAM, which stands for an Intelligent Continuous Air Monitor. So this is a device that continuously pulls air in through a portal, and it is monitoring both alpha particles and beta particles, which are given off by radioactive materials and the radionuclides of concern from the site. So you can monitor the airborne radioactivity. You can have alarm set points, you decide what those are, and you can track your air concentrations over time. So you have multiple ICAMs located around the site. And again, Frank will spend a little more time speaking to these particular devices. Next slide. So what does the ICAM look for? Well, so it is measuring or tracking radiation doses from airborne radionuclides, radioactive contaminants. And it's monitored, you'll hear Frank talk about this, using terms DAC and DAC hour. they're kind of obscure terms, but they're derived air concentration. So it's a measure of how much radioactivity is in air, and it's a worker focused measurement because you're concerned close in about what the workers are exposed to. So you're setting it to protect those people that are working in the highest potential concentration of these contaminants. So a DAC is a dose rate, and for example, 8/10 of a DAC gives you about 2 millirem an hour. And a DAC hour translates into a dose, and 2,000 DAC hours translates into 5,000 rem. 1 DAC hour is 2.5 millirem. So one of the questions is why 2,000 DAC hours? So originally, when they were setting up derived air concentrations, the thought was, how long can a worker working a full year, so 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, 2 weeks for vacation, how long can they work in an air concentration to not exceed their radiological limit? And that's where DAC and DAC hours came from. Next slide. So these ICAMs and other air monitors are looking for airborne radioactivity. And just to sort of put these things in context, um, the natural environment is radioactive, and it varies considerably. On the left, on the top left of this image, you can see a picture of the continental United States, and it's color coded to show you how radiation levels vary across the United States. And it's based on the geology. You know, is there a lot of uranium or radium or thorium or potassium in the soils that can contribute to a dose rate? So varying geology can affect the radiation level. Similarly, the lower image shows radiation doses that are created as a consequence of cosmic radiation coming to us from the sun and from outer space. And that largely depends on what the elevation you're at. So if you live in Denver, for example, your contribution from outer space might be on the order of 70 millirad per year. And if you live in Ohio, because you're lower elevation, it might be in the 40s, for example. So the natural background, gives you about 300 millirem per year, just on average for people across the United States. If you have medical procedures, that could add another 300 millirem per year plus. That's things such as dental x-rays for broken bones or CT scans. And to put it in perspective, for ports, the annual operating activities generate a dose of about roughly a millirem a year in the offsite public. And for the radiation workers on site, they typically are getting on the average about 60 millirem per year from one of the most recent reports. Next slide. So I wanted to put this in perspective, and this is kind of a slightly convoluted slide, and I apologize for it, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what do we know about radiation effects. And I want to set the stage. We have been working with radiation since 1895, that we were aware of it, and been learning how to control doses and exposures and understanding the risk. We could argue it's one of the most well-studied, best understood hazards around there because we have a really good understanding of how radiation interacts in the human body. So this graphic shows on the left-hand side from really high doses to really low doses. And if you look at it closely, you'll see that the dose goes from an absorbed dose in millirad up in the high end to what's called an effective dose down in millirem in the low dose. And this is a convention. It's based on how we actually calculate dose. But the point being, really high doses are reported in millirad, rad, or gray, and lower doses in the area that we're dealing with for environmental remediation and management of worker doses is in millirem or sievert. So push the button, please. So the red point shows us where we see severe effects from really high doses, tens of millions of doses. And then down in the environmental range, nothing really observable happens. It's very, very difficult to monitor any sort of effect. So again, when you have high doses, you can actually observe acute effects from radiation burns to definitely cancers. But in this lower region, the lower 2/3 of the graph, we have to calculate that using mathematical models. That's where the natural environmental doses fall in. That's where diagnostic X-ray procedures also fit in that area. But things like radiation therapy, cancer treatment, we are intentionally killing cancer cells. So those are observed effects. And then we've also learned from things such as the Japanese atomic bomb survivors, from the accident at Chernobyl, and more recently the accident at Fukushima. All of these have helped contribute to our understanding of radiation risk. But most importantly, as I said, the doses in the natural environment are where we can calculate, but we haven't observed risk. The typical kind of soil cleanup levels that EPA might ask for areas are down in the 10 millirem range, and the levels of dose from Portsmouth are down in the 1 millirem. And the worker administrative limits are on the order of 2,000 millirem per year. So all in the range where we could potentially calculate an impact, but we do not observe it. Next slide. So moving on to particulates, they also monitor particulate material that can be created as a consequence of the decommissioning activities. And the two that are monitored and reported, and Frank will speak to this, are PM 2.5 and PM 10. And these have standards that are specified under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. They have annual average limits. They also allow short-term average concentrations, and they're different between the two sizes. Next slide. So what is meant by PM 2.5 and PM 10? That refers to the particulate matter size, and they're expressed in microns, which is a millionth of a meter. And the graphic on the left shows you in comparison the width of a human hair versus the size of a PM 2.5, a PM 10, and some fine beach sand to give you just sort of a sense of scale. The reason that they're regulated is because these smaller particles can penetrate deeper into the lungs. And so you want to make sure that you do control the concentrations of these in the air to provide for safety of the workers and the public. Next slide. So with regard to the particulate monitoring for ports, as I mentioned before, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard does allow for short-term elevated air concentrations. They have specific limits, and those are tracked. But the intent is to allow for worker safety, but still get the necessary work done. Now, the other thing, Frank had mentioned, or not Frank, I'm sorry, Jeff had mentioned about fogging and misting as a way to knock particles out of the air so they don't travel as far. The bigger particles just naturally settle out very, very quickly. The PM10s and the PM 2.5 can they do settle out, but they can travel a bit further. So again, this is one of the reasons for things such as fogging and misting to help knock them down sooner and limit their concentrations. Next slide. So, close in and distant monitoring are used at the site. Now, this graphic is from another DOE facility just that shows sort of a classic bullseye pattern. This is a decommissioning effort. And you can see close into where the work is doing, not surprisingly, you have more elevated level of material in air. And again, that's just a consequence of how far these particles can travel. And so this is close in is where you're going to see the highest concentration, potential highest doses to the worker. At ports, they have multiple movable monitors. And again, Frank will speak to these. And for the close-in ones, you're monitoring for DAC hours, but for protecting the public and environment where the concentrations may be much, much lower, you may need to use longer sampling times and have fixed monitoring locations and report things in slightly different units. Next slide. So the whole goal behind these airborne measurements, you know, protecting the people that are taking these buildings apart. You need to monitor the safety and compliance of these activities against standards that apply not just to workers, but for protecting public and the environment. And this also makes sure that the decommissioning activities meet these standards. So they're monitoring airborne radioactivity for alpha and beta radiation attributable to radionuclides of concern, and those are reported in DAC hours. And then they're also monitoring for particulate matter for the PM10 and the PM2.5. Next slide. So, you know, in summary, kind of going back to my first couple of slides, you know, acceptable risk varies depending on, you know, your sort of point of perspective, but there's regulations that underpin these things. And importantly, the goal of this remediation is not to remove all the risk, but to reduce it to a level that provides for safety for the workers, the public, and the environment. And safety is always part of this. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn it over to Frank for his discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Higley, and good evening, folks. My name is Frank Johnston. I am the Director of Environmental Protection for Fluor BWXT, the contractor to Department of Energy. We are the primary contractor here on site for the D&D and environmental remediation of the site. A little bit there on my experience. The majority of my experience has been in sites just like Portsmouth, involved with D&D and environmental remediation. I have had experience as a state regulator, and I do have a lot of experience with control systems, wastewater treatment systems, and air pollution control systems. Next slide, please. So you have seen this slide before, but I want to elaborate just a little bit here. Dr. Higley described the windrows, and this is the windrows from the year 2020. We have an on-site meteorological station, stations I should say, in which we download the data every year and send it to a meteorologist that looks at the data and provides us a number of outputs, and one of which is this windrows. And we do this every year. We'll do it for 2021. There's not a whole lot of variability year to year, so we have a pretty good idea of what the prevailing winds are. But this is one of the key things that we use, as Dr. Higley indicated, in designing the air monitoring network that we have. So we use things like the windrows, we use best practices, industry practices, other meteorological data, input from the community, as far as establishing and designing the air monitoring network that we're currently implementing here at Portsmouth. The air monitoring network itself is shown. It's a little hard to read. You've been informed that these slides can be downloaded, so you can have maybe a better picture of the monitoring network. But the monitors are set up in a layered approach, where we have air monitoring at project boundaries. We have monitoring which is called midfield, which is between the project and the property boundary. And then we have monitoring at the property boundary and even off property. So it's this layering effect that gives us a good indication of the air emissions releases from the project boundary through the property boundary. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned, we went through an extensive deactivation of the X326 process building. That's certainly the 326 is going to be the focus of the remaining presentation here. So we had an extensive deactivation process from 2011 through 2020. And that process removed process gas equipment, a lot of piping, an asbestos abatement effort for the friable asbestos was in the 326 building. The removal of hazardous waste, universal waste, draining of oils, other liquids, solvents, those types of things. Those all occurred during the deactivation portion of the project. So with all that done, though, there was still some residual contamination, radiological contamination and chemical, just from the operational history of the site or of the building. In addition to those residual contaminants that are inherent in the building materials themselves, the structural steel, the concrete, other piping. There are contaminants that are inherent in just those materials of construction. So those things combined, the residual contaminants that we had and the contamination that is inherent in the materials of construction, led us to develop a very comprehensive list of contaminants of concern. And just some groups of parameters I've listed here. We're talking about dozens of contaminants that we actually monitor for, but we do monitor for radiological contaminants, for example, uranium and technetium-99, as well as non-radiological contaminants such as heavy metals. That would include things like copper and chromium, nickel, asbestos, volatile organic chemicals, which includes things like industrial solvents, trichloroethylene, and those types of solvents that we have and use over the operational history. The other class of contaminants that we're concerned with and want to monitor for are polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. Those were used in electrical equipment, ductwork, in the gaskets and the ductwork in the 326 building. So that was also a contaminant of concern that we are monitoring for. Next slide, please. So we have air monitoring locations. We have the contaminants of concern that we are concerned with. The next step was this air modeling, an air modeling effort that we did as part of the design effort for the 326 demolition effort. In this air modeling effort, we brought in a consultant to perform this modeling for us. We had this model independently reviewed by our expert. DOE had their own independent expert that was retained that reviewed it. And this model was also provided to Ohio EPA for their review and concurrence, which they did in May of 2020. And this model was used to estimate emissions from the individual projects, including the 326 demolition, but it was also used to model and estimate the cumulative emissions from all the activities that were occurring. As Jeff indicated in his presentation, there are other things going on here other than just the demolition of the 326. We have soil excavations, OSWDF operations. So this model looked at the individual sources, but it also looked at the cumulative impacts from all these activities. This air model convinced us that we can do these activities in compliance with all the applicable regulations that we have to comply with. It also informed us on how to establish going forward some of these monitoring locations that we've talked about, as well as some action levels that we use at the projects, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of the air monitoring equipment that are located throughout the site. On the left-hand side, as an example of the 326 project monitors, some of the classes of chemicals or contaminants that we're monitoring for are listed there. As was mentioned, the real-time alpha, real-time particulate matter is measured, heavy metals, PCBs, asbestos, radiological isotopes, and volatile organic chemicals. Ohio EPA and DOE have co-located 5 stations on the site. Now, these are set away from individual projects. There are 5 in each of north, south, east, and west of the property. And these monitoring locations monitor for particulate matter, volatile organic chemicals, metals, and asbestos. So these are the ones that are monitoring for the non-radiological contaminants. On the right-hand side is the Ohio Department of Health and the Department of Energy co-located samplers. Now, the Department of Energy has operated these monitors for years and years. The Ohio Department of Health came in and co-located their monitors next to the Department of Energy monitors. And these are used for the measurement of radiological contamination within the property, at the property boundary, and as well as off property. Next slide, please. So I want to spend a little bit of time with this figure. We're back to speaking specifically to the 326 process building. That is the building that is in the forefront. You're looking here from south to north. On the pad at this very southern end is some of the debris piles that have already been generated. And the demolition of the project will be proceeding north. Now what this diagram shows is some of the locations of the project related air monitoring devices. And I want to hit on just a couple real quickly. You'll see some green dots. Those are called midfield locations where we do some other sampling for radiological contaminants. On the left-hand side, you'll see some pink boxes adjacent to those green dots. Those are newly installed ICAMs, the Intelligent Continuous Air Monitors that Dr. Higley referred to. But what I want to focus on is the red triangles and the blue squares, if you can see those. The red triangles are the locations of the ICAMs. Now, those are mobile. Those will proceed with the progress of the demolition north, so that we're always monitoring and measuring the real-time alpha and beta as the demolition progresses. The blue boxes are the environmental remediation multi-contaminant stations, where things like the heavy metals, PCBs, those types of pollutants are monitored. 2 of those are stationary. 4 of them are also mobile, though, and they will also travel with the demolition as it progresses north. So we always have monitors in place that is actually monitoring the demolition as it progresses. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of some of the air monitoring equipment. Depending upon the class of pollutant that's being monitored and sampled for, there's different equipment for that. For example, the top left picture there is a picture of the real-time particulate matter we'll be talking about here shortly. Next slide, please. One of the things that we are very conscious of is the operability of all the air monitoring equipment that we have, because we want to make sure that no matter what the activities are ongoing, that we have sufficient amount of air monitoring equipment in place. So we do a daily go, no-go for those activities based on the air monitoring that is in place and operable. So every morning we have folks go out before work starts and confirm that the monitoring equipment is up and running and operational. Make a decision every morning of a go or a no-go based on that feedback. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit here about real-time monitoring. We have already mentioned that we have the 5 ICAMs that provide real-time measurements of alpha and beta. These readings are monitored continuously by a radiological technician. The ICAMs themselves include visual and audible alarms if any of the predetermined settings are exceeded. The particulate matter, real-time particulate matter, monitors for PM10 as well as PM2.5 at 3 of the project locations around the 326, as well as all 5 of the DOE and Ohio EPA co-located monitoring stations. These results are reviewed daily by project management, environmental remediation, and environmental protection folks, including myself. We also have set up that these monitors can send real-time email alerts when predetermined thresholds are exceeded. Now, this gives us real-time feedback that we can go and adjust our controls, look at the operations that's ongoing, adjust the positioning of the water misting, locations where water misting needs to be increased, those types of things. So those automatic email alerts gives us the ability in the feedback real time to go out there and control the emissions that's occurring. Next slide, please. So that real-time monitoring provides the first line of defense for us. It's very important as it helps us control the emissions as the demolition is proceeding. Thresholds are established such that if the emissions at the project boundary meet established limits, then there's assurance that it's going to meet at the property boundary. That's a fundamental concept that is part of our air monitoring program. We have these thresholds at project boundaries so that we can react if something goes on, immediately there, so that we can continue to ensure that the property boundary is safe and we're meeting whatever compliant limits that we have to meet. Provides the ability to immediately react to field activity. The other part of the real-time monitoring is the weather conditions. You'll see in the picture here, radiological technician monitoring both the alpha and beta as well as the real-time meteorological feedback from our meteorological stations. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about action levels. And in the box down there, it's just a reiteration of the action levels that we apply at the project boundary to ensure that any emissions at the property boundary are safe. So we have action levels that are established as low, medium, and high. A low action level is essentially, and you remember I spoke about the air modeling, the low action level is really set at the model estimated emission. The low action level is really a heads up. It's basically telling us that, maybe an assumption isn't quite right. Maybe, there's some additional controls have to be applied. But that low action level is really based on the emission estimate from the modeling output. Now we have a medium action level that is based on a regulatory threshold, and we set that at 75% of the regulatory threshold. If we happen to exceed 75%, we perform an operational review with project management, all the project folks, environmental protection, safety and quality assurance, and other support organizations to understand what might be happening that is causing an exceedance at that level. Because again, we want to stay below the requirements that we have at the property boundary. The next action level is a high action level. At that level, we stop work, pull everybody in, we secure the site, the project, and we begin to develop an understanding of what might be happening so that we can develop the corrective actions that are necessary to be able to restart work. If we have an exceedance of a high action level, we have committed to provide Ohio EPA and the community a notice within 24 hours of discovery of that high action level. Next slide, please. So here's some real-time data for particulate matter at the 10 micron level. Before I talk about the actual readings at the bottom there, I want to identify the three important lines here. That top red line is the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for PM10. We've adopted that as a standard to compare our emissions to. That is also what we consider to be the high action level for PM10. The next line below that is the medium action level. That is set at 75% of the 150. And then the bottom line is the low action level. Now the readings that we have on particulate matter at PM10, you can see is consistently below the low action level. I've identified in those readings where we began the structural demolition back in May 17th, I believe. I also identified a peak as interest, but also to give you an indication of how sensitive these pieces of equipment are. We were noticing some elevated readings, and we got with Ohio EPA, and they confirmed they had some elevated readings, not only on our site, but across the state. And it turns out that we were able to trace this back to a smoke plume that was coming from some of the western wildfires that were occurring at the time. So it just gives an idea of the sensitivity of the equipment that we are dealing with. Next slide, please. This is a chart showing Ohio or the Department of Energy's PM10 readings at the DOE and OEPA co-located stations. Again, you'll see at the very top the National Ambient Air Quality Standard of 150 micrograms per cubic meter for PM10. The readings are consistently and reliably below that standard at the DOE and Ohio EPA co-located stations. You'll see a couple spikes early on. One of the early spikes there, I think was in April. I have to admit I don't have my glasses on. I can't. It was March and April timeframe, I believe. There was some construction activities going on at the on-site waste disposal facility that was closer to the air monitoring station than usual. Similarly, there was another spike, I think, towards April that was about the same situation. Next slide, please. Here is a chart of PM 2.5, and this is back at the 326 project boundary. You'll see the red line that's established there. That is the NAAQS standard for PM 2.5, which is 35. And you'll see the readings that, again, are consistently and reliably below that standard for PM 2.5. I did identify, again, that western wildfire smoke plume that caused the PM 2.5 to elevate a little bit, and I identified that peak. Next slide, please. Donnie, next slide. Are we on? There we go. So let me talk just a little bit about the real-time monitoring for the radiological contaminants of alpha and beta. It has been mentioned we use these intelligent continuous air monitors for this purpose. And we have set an alarm at the 0.8 DAC hour level. And I'm not going to repeat what Dr. Higley went through, only to say that that alarm level is at an occupationally safe level. But if it alarms at that level, we get with our radiological engineers or project supervisors, and we take action to attempt to bring those emissions back down. If we have a 2.0 DAC hour, we have a limit there that we go ahead and we stop work. Pull people out, secure the site, figure it out, and put whatever corrective actions are necessary in to go back and continue working. In addition, all our modeling and all our monitoring is based on wind levels less than 15 miles an hour. So if we have sustained winds above 15 miles an hour at a height of 10 meters, we stop work. We use the sustained winds over a 15-minute period to be able to make that determination. Now, the 10-meter height is important because that separates the cell floor from the operations floor. The cell floor is where the process gas equipment is. So it is that level that want to ensure we understand the wind conditions. Next slide, please. So this is just a foreshadowing of my punchline here in the next slide. Actual measurements have been very good. In fact, you can go ahead and proceed to the next slide, Donnie. This is showing the real-time alpha compared to the 0.8 DAC hour limit from the beginning of April through the end of September. See that at all 5 stations, the alpha has been very low, consistently and reliably low and protective. It goes to show and tell us that the contamination is low and it's staying within the project boundary. Next slide, please. So in summary, the charts that I went over are showing that the PM data that's recorded to date, we've had good success. The control of fugitive emissions has been good with the water misting, the fixative applications, the things that we have been doing have been pretty successful so far. Same for the radiological releases as measured by the real-time alpha and beta. It's indicating that the controls that we've instituted are protective of the workers and the public. With that, I think I will turn it back over to Eric. Thank you.
Hey, thank you guys. It is we just want to say thank you first and foremost to Jeff Bettinger, Dr. Kathy Higley, and Frank Johnston for providing their presentations to us tonight. So at this point, we're going to release them to kind of sneak away, grab a drink of water, and start sorting through the questions that have that come forward. So we'll let them start working on that and getting forward. We do want to point out a couple things as we prepare for this next portion of our meeting. First and foremost, some of the information that we alluded to during the presentations, in particular the data of the co-located monitors and updated real-time monitoring data, can be found at portsdemo.com. Right, and so we want to make sure you guys are aware of that and know that there's an outlet for you to find that information. Two, we want to kind of prepare you for the next little bit. We are going to in just a second break away and take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll do the Q&A from the questions provided tonight. Now, some of the questions asked are quick, easy answers. They're simple and easy to go to. Some of the questions that we've seen pop up in the chats tonight, and thank you for those questions. Thank you for the questions you've emailed into us, for the questions you provided both on YouTube and on WebEx. Sometimes they take a little more time to thoroughly vet the question and get the right answer. So we have committed, and it was mentioned Tuesday night, and we'll say again tonight, that by October 22nd, questions will be posted with written answers on the Ports Virtual Event website. So the portsvirtualevent.com will have answers to all the questions. So if you ask a question tonight, and they're all very good questions, but some of them might take a little more time to talk through than what we had set aside for tonight. We'll have written answers for you by the 22nd. So want to make sure that that's good and available. Want to remind everybody, you can continue to submit questions to ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov. Again, that will be open for days, weeks beyond this first meeting. With the intention is to have additional meetings like this. So continue to provide your questions there, and we will continue to address those and provide answers as we go forward. You guys did do a great job in the chat on both YouTube and WebEx of providing questions. We have several tonight, some from Dr. Menuda. Looks like Matt Brewster chimed in with a question on WebEx. Mr. Bill Myers. And so we're thankful for those. We did see over on the YouTube, we had questions from Miss Shea. Gonzo's Funhouse Gang submitted a question. And there was a question also from Miss Kaylee Sprigg. Miss Sprigg, if your question asked about looking for a form to join, we wanted to make sure we gave you the right answer on that. So if you could clarify what you were looking for the form to join, that would be really helpful, and we'll make sure we can get a response to you on that. If you're still with us, we'd appreciate it. Okay, so when we come back from break, we're going to work ourselves through these questions and answers. We'll tell you which questions we can answer, which questions will be provided in writing. The ones we can answer in person, we'll have Jeff, Frank, Kathy provide us answers. The others will be passed along and be the written answers are already being developed and they'll be posted shortly. And then at that point, when that's wrapped up, we'll go into the public comment portion of the night. And just as a reminder, before we break, Donnie, if you have that slide on the public comment, tonight's public comment, we're going to ask you to identify yourself. It has to be on WebEx. I don't have a way to take public comment on YouTube, so you have to participate via WebEx to provide public comment. If you're on YouTube, if you're watching this later, you can always use the ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov email to submit your comments or statement. But for public comment, when we come back and we'll call for it, we'll ask you to raise your hand, and you can see on the WebEx there's the smiley face emoticon at the bottom, the little plus symbol with the and if you click on it, you're going to see a pop-up window that looks like the one on the right-hand side of your screen. And I have the option at the top of that to a little pop-up box to raise your hand. If you click raise your hand, it'll pop your hand up and we'll be able to see you on the WebEx participants list, and we'll identify you and ask you to come forward. At that point, we'll allot 4 minutes for you to provide your questions and comments. And after about 3.5 minutes, I'll let you know your time's almost away. At 4 minutes, I'll step in and ask you to wrap up your comments. And then we'll do that kind of as a one-off type situation. So look for that. We will be back in about 15 minutes. Okay, so 15 minutes. It is, let's see if I can find a clock here in front of me. It is 7:17, so we will be back at 7:32, and we will begin the question and answer and public comment session. Thanks for being with us tonight. We look forward to continuing our discussion with you, and we'll see you shortly. 15 minutes, we'll be right back here. Thanks. Hey guys, this is Eric. If you're following along at home, we're about 5 minutes away from starting the Q&A session. So about 5 minutes, we'll be back with questions and answers and moving forward with the second half of this meeting. See you shortly. All right, folks, we're about 1 minute away. We'll give our presenters a chance to get settled back in and get the cameras on. All right. So as we begin our Q&A session for tonight with, again, Jeff Bettinger, Dr. Kathy Higley, and Frank Johnson, we want to start and cover questions that were asked Tuesday night. We will make sure anybody who wasn't here and wasn't available to hear the benefit of those questions and those answers, we're going to go ahead and double dip because they were good questions. We want to make sure we maximize that information and that knowledge base. So we're going to start with questions that were asked Tuesday night, and then we're going to transition to questions that were asked tonight. So with that, I'll kind of read the question and identify one of the presenters to see if you guys can, not see if you can, but see if you'll let you go ahead and provide an answer for us, okay? All right, make sure you guys are all unmuted. All right. So question one, why are the fogger / water cannons rarely aimed at the shear performing the demo? They always seem to be misting in the area, but never at the source of the dust. Jeff, do you want to start with that one?
Sure, yes, thanks, Eric. That's a good question. There are different tools and methods used for dust suppression. All of the area where they're going in and doing the shearing has been coated with fixative. And typically misters and foggers are handled differently than a hose stream that you may have seen in another demolition scenario, where they basically take a fire hose with a low velocity nozzle and put it on there. What we do with the foggers is we blanket the area with this fog, and that prevents dust from leaving the footprint. So equipment operators are capturing the dust with this mist and letting it fall to the ground. And so the people who are placing those items that I showed you that are remotely controlled are actually placing those in the area so that they'll blanket the area with the foggy material. And we know this is working because our sample data has shown that all of the samples for the dust and any other and the radiological samples are all way below the limits. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. All right, so our second question, what is the chain of command if contaminants of concern are detected? The chain of command if contaminants of concern are detected. Are there any steps for a stop work order, and how will the public be informed of such an action? Has there been any exceedance of action levels during the demolition thus far? Frank?
Yeah, I'll take that one. The Environmental Remediation Organization and Environmental Protection review the analytical data and the real-time particulate matter data constantly. So we're always looking at that data. There have in fact been a few exceedances of a low action level on a few of the heavy metals and PCBs. Again, the low action levels were related to the model estimates. It just gave us an indication that to give it a closer look. In fact, we re-upped some of our sampling we did for PCBs as a result of that. We have had nothing approach the medium or high action levels for any of the pollutants that we have been monitoring for and have analytical data back yet for. Chain of command, if we would happen to see, a high action level exceeded, environmental protection would be getting with the site project director, and we would be issuing a stop work. One of the things that's important to note, and I tried to emphasize that in my comments, was that these action levels are at the project boundary. So just because we have a high action level exceedance does not necessarily mean that that is an imminent danger at the project boundary or beyond. But that's the chain of command as far as addressing a stop work. I will go to the project director and recommend that the project halt until we get corrective actions in place.
Okay, thanks, Frank.
Yep.
Hey, so Jeff, I know one of the there have been some comparisons between the open air demolition taking place in Hanford, Washington, and Portsmouth, Ohio. And one of the questions surrounding that is the difference in the wind speed limit at the two sites. Can you address that difference?
Sure. When we're determining the limits and what we consider these limiting conditions of operations, we have to consider what we're dealing with, what the contaminants of concern are, and their ability to be transported off-site or off of the project footprint. And so it's unique to every project that we do. The work that we're doing here at Portsmouth is very similar. It's a uranium processing facility, and it's very similar to work that was done previously at Oak Ridge. And the limit there that was used successfully was the 15 miles an hour, measured 10 meters above the ground. The situation in Hanford that a lot of people often compare this to was a situation where they were doing demolition on a plutonium facility. Now, the compounds that are used and that are encountered in this plutonium facility were much lighter. It was a compound that had plutonium in it, but it was a compound and it was a much lighter than the uranium hexafluoride that we deal with here. So therefore, it has less of a potential to be transported off-site. The one thing I can tell you is that Portsmouth shares the 15 mile per hour limit with many of the other DOE demolition sites that are working on similar materials, Idaho, West Valley, and Paducah. In fact, in some areas where you may have different compounds, such as in Fernald, they had a 25-mile-an-hour wind speed limit during demolition.
Okay. So I think the follow-up question to that we received from Tuesday is that it can be perceived, or maybe people have the feeling that DOE is more protective at other sites. And so that was one of the questions we had is specifically why is DOE more protective at other sites? So Jeff?
Right. Well, I would not say I would not infer that based on those different speed limits because of different, or wind limits because of different conditions, is that they're being any more protective. Um, Regulatory limits establish the parameters for safe operations at our sites, and they're protective of human health and the environment. And we've worked with the local regulators, the OEPA, US EPA, and Ohio Department of Health to do that, and we're using well-established industry standards. Frank talked about some of those national standards for particulate monitoring, and also Dr. Higley had talked about the DAC units, and how we're using those. In fact, one could argue that we're actually even being more protective here at Ports, because we have put in the berm surrounding the building to collect all the water that would run off of the building. And that's something that this is the first time something like that has been implemented in the complex.
Okay, thank you. So Jeff, you started the presentation off, and we're introducing us to the X326 building, obviously a former gaseous diffusion facility. So the question is, was the interior fully decontaminated before the exterior asbestos transite siding was removed and exposing the interior to the winds? So was the interior fully decontaminated before the siding removed, exposing it to the winds?
Well, thank you, Eric. I think really what we want to emphasize here is that what we did is we deactivated it. Okay. Typically, decontamination means thoroughly, totally, absolutely cleaned. Okay, when you that's something that you do for something before you will release it to. But we deactivated it, and it was a lengthy process. Took more than 9 years, and during that time, the vast majority of the radioactive equipment and radioactivity in the building was removed. In fact, as I mentioned, something approximately 93.5% of all the radiological constituents in the building were removed. There's just some residuals that are left in there that we couldn't. And we took extensive measurements. Every system that handled uranium hexafluoride, which was the compound that was in there, was measured, and everything that didn't meet very strict limits that were established were removed from the building, and they're going to be disposed of off-site. Those that haven't already been disposed of are still being processed to be disposed of off-site. The building was then, I mentioned it earlier, we swept the building, and when I say swept, I meant we did walkthroughs of the building. We had teams, the waste acceptance criteria teams, the waste acceptance organization teams, would walk down the building numerous times to do 100% inspections of this material. We did it, as I said, several times just to make sure that we caught everything to be removed. And I think that's the best summary of it there.
Oh, perfect. All right. So Jeff, I'm gonna give you just a moment to catch your breath. Frank, I got a question for you. But before we do that, let me clarify real quick. We have three sets of questions. One is a set we received Tuesday night that we answered in real time Tuesday, and those are available on the YouTube page. Answers to those written questions are going to be available by October 22nd on the portsvirtualevent.com website. The set of questions we're talking about right now were the ones received after the meeting on Tuesday, but before we started tonight. So these are kind of the in-between day questions that were sent typically via email that we received. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't misconstruing these questions that were coming, and everyone knew where they fell in the timing. So these are the second set, and then we have a third set of questions we'll get to that we received tonight. So Sorry about that, Frank. So your question, Frank, were air monitors continuous to provide sampling? And what were the locations of the samplers?
Okay, I believe the question's getting to sampling techniques, and we do have continuous sampling at the Ohio EP or the Ohio Department of Health and DOE co-located samples for radionuclides. And that's a situation where the air is drawn through a sampling filter 24/7 for a week, and that filter is then changed, and then that monitoring begins again, and it goes 24/7 for another week, and so on and so on until we get a monthly, those several weeks are then composited into a monthly sample. So for radionuclides, for the ODH and the Department of Energy co-located locations, it is continuous monitoring to produce a weekly sample that is eventually composited into a monthly composite for analysis. Now we also monitor for radiological isotopes and heavy metals at the 326 boundary. We do a once per week sampling for those constituents that matches the Ohio EPA sampling frequency. And when we go out and collect a sample, we again run the sampler and pull the air through the filters for 24 hours. And then we go and collect that sampling filter and send it off for analysis. We do PCBs the same way, but that's at a different frequency. That's at once per month. So the location of all these air monitors and the windrows showing the prevailing winds are actually in the presentation. I believe it was slide 33, but that will show where these project locations in the Department of Energy and ODH co-located stations are.
Perfect. And you mentioned slide 33. For anyone who needs to, you can still download the copy of the presentation shared tonight on the portsvirtualevent.com website. You can go there and find a copy of it and see what Frank is referring to. All right, Jeff, a question about the decontamination of the X326 building before the siding removal. The question is, they would request if you would provide the evidence of the sampling and the non-destructive assay of analysis data.
Okay, I spoke previously about the lengthy deactivation process. As I said, it took over 9 years. And one thing that I failed to mention previously, and I'm going to mention this time, take the opportunity, was that, and then the entire interior of the building was sprayed with fixative to immobilize any material that could be generating dust or something like that, so that when the siding was taken off, it would not generate dust or anything like that. In addition, once the siding was taken off, we sprayed fixative through the outside of the building into it. And during all that time, our particulate monitors and the air monitors were in place, and you saw the data that came off from them, so that indicated that material did not escape from the building. Regarding the specific question regarding the evidence of the sampling and the non-destructive assay analysis data, that data was reviewed by the contractor and the Department of Energy, and it's not available for the public.
Okay. So Frank, back to the sampling monitors in the initial airship. When were the sampling monitors set, and when was the sampling initiated?
Okay, well, there's the key dates here, and I think Jeff identified in his presentation. Transite was beginning to be removed from the 326 building on February 24th. We had the project monitoring stations, the 326 project monitoring stations, in place and operational in January. A month before Transite came off. The ODH and the DOE co-located monitors were operational on October of 2020. Keep in mind, though, that the DOE part of that sampling we've been doing for years and years. It was only when Department of Health co-located their monitoring stations with DOE stations. That occurred in October of 2020. And the Ohio EPA and DOE co-located stations, they were in place and operational in December of 2020.
Thanks. All right, Jeff, this is a little bit of a lengthy question, so I'll read it to you as it was presented to us, okay? DOE's experience with dust control measures during demolition has been atrocious. Hanford used fixative, and misting and contamination spread 10 miles. How are we supposed to be confident that Piketon will be any different? Especially considering even before open air demo, we have material showing up off-site in air, water, sediment, and soil.
Okay, what I can say is that the DOE is using the best practices and lessons learned from the safe and compliant demolition of hundreds of radiologically contaminated facilities that have been taken care of over the past 30 years. And the most analogous site to the Portsmouth site is the Oak Ridge site, the K-25 plant in Oak Ridge, in which 5 uranium enrichment buildings were demolished without using controls similar to ours, wind speed, levels similar to ours, or wind speed restrictions similar to ours, and that occurred without experiencing any airborne non-compliance issues. Once again, when we compare Hanford with Portsmouth, we're comparing apples to oranges. There was a plutonium finishing facility. The isotopes, or the compounds, I should say, that were being dealt with there were different. They were lighter than the uranium hexafluoride that we're dealing with here. And so that's why they could become airborne more easily and travel further. We have looked at these lessons learned, and that was part of how we determined that it was important to put in the extensive air monitoring system with the real-time monitors that we do have installed.
Okay. And that concludes our questions that we received in the mid-time between the two meetings on Tuesday and Thursday. We have a set of questions that were received tonight via chat and via email, and we're going to address those at this point. First question is for Jeff, and it comes from Dr. David Menuda. Transite is the maintenance-free material used for building exteriors containing asbestos and concrete. The fibers needed to be captured in order for the public not to breathe them. How do you know that this task was safely accomplished?
Okay, good question. We engineered precautions into this, as I talked about how we did it before. We sprayed the outside and the inside with fixative. That was why the building was blue. And then also the asbestos contractor, it's a licensed asbestos contractor that's removing this material. They have monitors that are being used while they're doing the removal that have filters in them that they're able to sample. In addition, the joint Ohio EPA DOE monitors also sample for asbestos, and so we've been monitoring it that way also, and have not had any detections in either case.
Okay. Question 2 for you. Has the ground under the X326 building been tested for chemical and radiological contamination? And if yes, then what was detected and in what quantities? Potential remediation could then be necessary.
That is correct. I don't know the extent of sampling that has occurred to date beneath the slab in the 326 building, and we can get that information and post it. But as part of the slab removal, there will be extensive sampling done, and if there is remediation that is required, that will be completed. And so we'll be able to get back to you later with something about how much sampling has already been done. But it is in the plan that extensive sampling will have to occur when the slab is coming up.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. So question 3 is from Bill Myers, and it's Jeff, I think you're going to address this one as well. Where is the data that was collected for air monitors, and is it available to the public? If sampling of decontamination data decontamination data available to the public, and if so, where can it be obtained?
Okay, the data is readily available. The Ohio EPA data is posted on an Ohio EPA website, and we can publish those links on our website. The Ohio Department of Health data is published on their website. They have a public-facing website. And the DOE data, the plan is that it will be posted on the DOE 326 building website. We're in the process of working that out. But I will also say, that all three sources of data are being posted side by side on a quarterly basis on our Pegasus website, and we'll post a link to that also. So all of this data is available. Regarding the data on the decontamination and the non-destructive testing, as I mentioned before, that data is not available for the public.
I was just checking, Jeff, the links to those websites, definitely the Pegasus website. There's is available on the Ports virtualevent.com website. So that's an easy spot for folks to go and find it. At the bottom of the page, there's a link to the Pegasus website.
Okay.
All right, the next question comes from Chloe Shea and Jeff. The water that runs off is treated. What happens to the water that seeps down to the groundwater?
Well, I'm glad you asked. That's a good question. The water, the way we've designed the system with the berm surrounding the building, that berm is lined with an impermeable liner that's been leak tested. It's similar to the liner that we use at the on-site waste disposal facility. And that material is all collected in sumps. And so none of that material that runs off the slab has a chance to be absorbed in the groundwater. So we collect it all and send it for treatment before we discharge it to our outfall.
Okay. Frank, I'm gonna put you on the spot here real quick. There's a lengthy, kind of a lengthy question here from David Menuda, and we'll have the entire question posted on the website. But it looks like the gist of the question is, what assurance do the contract employees, DOE personnel, and neighbors have that there aren't any significant off-site radiation issues?
Well, I think we've tried to emphasize that today of all the planning and design and effort has went into the actual demolition. So I think that does provide some assurance that what we're doing is based on good, sound industry practices. But to buttress that, we have established this, pretty robust air monitoring network. And we are monitoring and will be posting and evaluating this data and reporting this data in our annual site environmental report. Those reports we've been doing annually for years and years, and will continue to do so. And that will give the public an indication of what the impacts are from our work activities. So it's really a combination of the design and the practices and the controls we put into place, the real-time monitoring that we're using to control, buttressed by the air monitoring network and the reporting and evaluation of that data that should provide assurance to the public that this is being conducted safely.
Okay. So question for Jeff from YouTube. Gonzo's Funhouse Gang asks, hey, Jeff, in the beginning, you discussed data reports being generated prior to material being removed from the buildings. What kind of oversight is done on these reports on the DOE or oversight level?
Gonzo's Funhouse Gang. It sounds like YouTube is the place to be. What I just wanted to mention here is that the data reports that were generated that involve the non-destructive analysis and the deactivation were extensively reviewed by subject matter experts at FBP and then also with the DOE. We have a team that did those reviews. Some of the calculations that resulted from those were reviewed by the Ohio Department of Health, who actually brought in subject matter experts to review them. If there is referring also to other things like plans and things like that, like the demolition plan or air monitoring report, and those types of data sets, they're prepared by FBP, and then the Department of Energy reviews those. And then when they meet our standard, then we submit them to the Ohio EPA, and Ohio EPA works with the Ohio Department of Health for the review of those. And sometimes when the Department of Energy is reviewing a document, we may call in a subject matter expert like we did on the air monitoring. And sometimes when the Ohio Department of Health or Ohio EPA is reviewing a document, they may call in a subject matter expert like they did on some of the nuclear safety documents. They brought in some folks from Oak Ridge to review those.
Perfect. Thanks. Hey, we're going to tag in Dr. Kathy Higley here. You ready, ma'am? Do we have a good, reliable data on background radiation in regions far away from federal nuclear program complex facility, or excuse me, federal nuclear weapons complex facilities, such as ports? This background, presumed from fallout, plus naturally occurring potassium and uranium, needs to be known with the best possible precision.
So that's a great question, but it's also really challenging. If you remember the figures that I showed in my talk about images across the United States, the natural background varies considerably, and from foot to foot based on the underlying geology and whether or not you are fertilizing your petunias or um, a number of factors, and in addition fallout. So characterizing background is really challenging to do, and as I said, it's quite variable. Department of Energy sites, all across the country, as part of their annual site environmental reports, do provide some of this information. EPA also tracks some of this. You'll see it in the scientific literature, trying to understand the range of activities. The USGS is the one that is responsible for those gorgeous overflight maps, where they actually took radiation detectors and strapped them onto planes and flew them across the country to be able to determine contributions primarily from uranium, thorium, and potassium. That's what generated those maps, plus the cosmic contribution. So there's general understanding of what contributes to background and fallout, but it is very variable across the country, and even across your backyard.
All right. Perfect question. Hey, Jeff, I got another question received via email from Chloe Shea, and it's concerned with the location of the Pike County Career Technical Center. Yeah, the Career Technical Center, the CTC, that sets up off 32, I believe. So the question is, I have concerns about the Pike CTC's proximity to Zons Corner Middle School. What is being done to test this school and surrounding businesses and homes? If nothing is being done, how quickly can something be done to ensure the safety of students and staff?
Okay. After the Zons Middle School sampling, and then when the department sent a sampling team in there, in discussions with the local community, the department agreed to fund a independent study that was going to do sampling in areas surrounding the port site. And in addition, as part of that, a professional risk assessment organization was going to come in and do a risk assessment associated with that. The department has funded that study, and it's being administered by Ohio University. And we don't have information on the results of that study, so we just have to wait for that to come out. But it has been funded, and it is in progress. That's all I'm able to tell you about it, because that's all I know.
All right, perfect. All right, a second question from Miss Chloe Shea. Again, received via email. From the slides on the information on the slides you presented tonight, Jeff, she understands that there are a variety of monitors around the site for contamination detection. Were those in place before Zons Corner shut down? And are those protocols in this meeting happening in response to that situation?
Okay. The ports monitoring network, which was the bulk of the 18 monitors that are at the site perimeter, and some of them are off-site, those have been in place for over 30 years. And that data has all been published in the annual site environmental reports. And so that has been in place, and that's where the detector that was near the Zons Middle School was part of that network. So we have data from that particular sampling point for 30 years, 30 plus years. So the so I guess the answer, the additional monitors that we put in that Frank talked a lot about that were adjacent to the demolition project, those, we would put those in no matter what, because we would want to monitor what's going on happening during the demolition. So, and then the joint Ohio EPA and Ohio Department of Health monitors, well, that was a program that we wanted to do. Is that a result of the discussions and with the community? I guess you could say that in some respects it was a result of that, in order to bring that independent view into there of those samples that were being taken while this was occurring.
Okay. Hey, Frank, we got a question from Chloe we're going to direct towards you. Contamination could result from plant demolition or from previous plant activity. What type of testing will happen on off-site areas?
Well, I again refer back to our annual site environmental reports and the DOE, the historical DOE air monitoring that they have done off-site. Those annual site environmental reports show the locations of where these air monitors are. And that's going to continue. So we'll be monitoring for, at those locations off property for specific radioisotopes for the duration of this project. I do note that there is, those ACERs are available in the Environmental Information Center. I believe there is a link that's at the Ports virtual event, www.portsvirtualevent.com. I also believe that they are posted on the Pegasus website. So those are available that will give you an indication of where these monitoring locations are and the historical data associated with them, and those will continue to be produced every year.
All right, thanks, Frank. Hey, another question submitted via email, Jeff, from an MR Murray 98. What prevents the water being sprayed on the possibly contaminated material from leaching into the ground before being treated?
We rely on our berm to collect that water that surrounds the area. That's one of the reasons why it's also good to have the fog, so that it is in there and it's contained in that area there, so that it'll bring the material down. But the berm surrounds the entire building, and we collect water from it and treat that before it goes into our treatment center and is sent to our permitted outfall. And once again, I'll reiterate that that liner is very similar to the on-site waste disposal facility. It's got a membrane liner in it that has been leak checked and verified that the integrity. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, Kathy, you're back on stage, ma'am. A question from Chloe via YouTube. Dr. Catherine mentioned that the lower radiation doses don't have observable effects. Is there potential for those effects to manifest many years later, in older age, perhaps? How long are the observations?
So trying to tease out radiation effects at really low doses is an ongoing scientific investigation. But the challenge is that you have these naturally occurring radiation background doses, 300, 400, 500, even, 1,000 millirem a year that occur just because of the geology or the elevation that you live at, and then you can add in additional from medical. So you have these doses, and every day the dose kind of varies a little bit, and then you put on top of it just a little smidgen, less than a fraction of a percent from the activities, say, such as at Portsmouth, and trying to tease out effects at that level are just extremely difficult. So, as I mentioned, we've been studying radiation effects for more than 100 years. the gold standard of data is something called the Japanese atomic bomb survivors, the people that survived the bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, have been followed through their entire lifespan. Their children are being followed, and that informs what we know about radiation effects on humans. And that data, we really can't see impacts below 10,000 millirem from a very short, intense effect. People continue to look to see if we might be able to drive our knowledge a little bit lower. There are studies at cellular level and things like genomics and other such studies that are trying to tease it out. But what we do know, and what the radiation protection community does understand, is at really, really low doses, the risk, the potential for an adverse effect, such as a cancer, is very, very low. And so that additional impact is added to a baseline that for humans, about a third of us are gonna get cancer in our lifetime, just as a consequence of living. And so the risk from doses such as a millirem are just a tiny, bump on top of that existing risk. I hope that answers. It was a great question. It was a really good question.
I appreciate you taking a swing at it. Thanks. All right, so we had a couple additional questions that we're going to provide a written response to, in particular, and both of these come from my good friend, Dr. David Menuda. So, Dr. Menuda, your questions: the monitor looks like a programmable logic controller, PLC. While these devices are valuable in monitoring fugitive contaminants, it is critically important that we're monitoring all the potential problematic contaminants. What assurance has DOE leadership provided to the DOE on-site team, the contract employees involved at all on these various contaminants? So you're going to see a written response to that by October 22nd on the portsvirtualevent.com website. And then the second set of questions, Dr. Menuda, when the ICAMs are in use, how long is the device programmed to sample? The longer the sample time is, the higher the probability is for identifying in cubic feet of sample potential contaminants. So we're going to give you a written response explaining that as well. So I want to thank everybody for providing questions. I see that there are several other questions that have popped in throughout this discussion. Those questions, along with any other additional questions you have. Again, this ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov. Donnie, can you put that up for me? Ports-demo-questions at pppo.gov. If anything tonight triggered an additional question, any of the questions you asked tonight you didn't see an answer to, anything that you think of in the next day, week, month, shoot us an email and give us a chance to respond, and then post it on the website for everyone else. And so it'll take place there at the ports-demo-questions at ppo.gov. And again, you're going to see the written responses by October 22nd on the portsvirtualevent.com website. So with that, we are going to transition to the next portion of our meeting, and we're going to open up our meeting for public comment. Okay, so this is a chance for you to, if you're participating via WebEx, to provide oral comment to the group. We are going to take it as comment. Any questions you ask, we will make note of, and we will attempt to answer in written response on the website, just as we are the questions that are submitted on the via the email. So, with that being said, if you would like to participate in the public engagement portion, the public comment portion of tonight's meeting, I'm going to ask, if you're on WebEx, if you'll raise your hand, right? And again, you look at the little smiling face emoticon and click on it. You'll get a pop-up box. You can raise your hand. In that case, then we'll identify you. We'll unmute you, ask you to introduce yourself, and then give you 4 minutes to provide your comment. If it needs to be a lengthier comment, please provide it in writing to the ports-demo-questions at ppo.gov. I know I've said that a lot, but I want to make sure that comes across. So we are looking for if there's anyone that would like to participate in public comment. We'll give you just a second. All right. I am not seeing anyone that's asking to speak. Hey, so Tuesday night, we had approximately 85 to 90 folks participate in the meeting. Tonight, it looked like we were somewhere in the neighborhood of mid 60s, maybe just tip the scale at close to 70 folks tonight, which is a great turnout. And we're so thankful that you took this opportunity to be with us tonight. Hopefully you found it helpful and engaging. And we know this is not the ideal venue or format, platform to engage people in. However, it is the best option we have right now, maintaining social distancing and protective of health. Plus, it allows us to really expand our reach and go to a larger area. We thank you for coming tonight and participating.
Hey, Eric.
Yes.
This is Jack. It looks like we've got a couple folks out there that may have their hand up to make a comment.
Oh, ha. I do see one now. Okay, perfect. Thanks. Thanks, Jack. All right, we're going to start with Vina. David, I apologize. I didn't see your hand. I nearly scooted right past you. So we're gonna open the floor up to Miss Vina Colley. Vina, we did this the other night. You know how it works, ma'am. You ready? Hey, Vina, are you there? Hey, Vina, you're still muted, ma'am. If you're on your phone, I believe it's *6 will unmute you. If you're on the app, there should give you the opportunity at the bottom of the picture to unmute yourself. Oh, looks like she's put her hand down. Okay. All right, so we're gonna slide over to Dr. Menuda. Dr. Menuda, are you there?
Wait a minute, honey.
Oh, that sounds like Vina. Vina, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. All right, so
I don't know what's going on.
how technology. Hey, how are you feeling tonight?
A lot better than last Tuesday.
I
Or
am
night before last.
I am glad to hear that. Hey, we're gonna give you 4 minutes and let you provide your comments, okay?
Okay, I'm a little concerned about Kathy and her knowledge of the radiation exposures on humans. I don't know if she knows about Dr. John Goffman, Rosa Patel, Dr. Stewart, a lot of doctors who says that no dose is good for you. So I'm concerned about her and her speech. My other concern is about Jeff and what's his name talking about the PCB oil in those process buildings. Those are radioactive PCB oils. It's in all three process buildings. Actually, there was a congressional hearing in 1985 over that PCB oil that is being radioactive. So I'm concerned that you're not getting the radioactive nuclides that's in that PCB oil. I'm also concerned about how Jeff kind of downplays the plutonium. We've been doing that downplaying since 1999 when we came forward with the documents about the plutonium at the site. And you got to remember, since 1954, we've been recycling reactor fuel from Savannah River, West Valley, New York, Russia, Hanford. And so this whole site is contaminated, not with low levels of radiation or plutonium, but high levels. We have high levels of transuranics here at Piketon, including technetium and whatever else is there. So I don't think we're getting an accurate accountability how bad this facility is. And I think that they continue, or whoever's doing your testing, because I know the NRC and the health department and none of those people have jurisdiction over the radioactive component of that facility other than DOE and the DOD. And so I'm really concerned about who's really taking the test, who's overseeing these tests, and I think it's all being downplayed, and I'm really concerned about it. And I'm concerned about all of these people who actually don't live in this community, who come in here and tell people all these lies about the exposures that they're getting. That whole building, not only that building, and it's one of the largest buildings in the facility, and there's a lot of comparison between us and Hanford and these other facilities, because we have the largest facility in the world, not only one facility, but two facilities, and there's all kinds of proof, including proof from your own documents that I've read at many meetings. Dr. Ketters went through and found all your documents of off-site contamination, and we're not addressing the off-site contamination and all this wind and stuff that's being blown going through that process building, and we know that all this contamination laid in all those rafters, on the walls, on the asbestos that come around the facility. You can't get away from the contamination in the transuranics at the Piketon site, and I'm concerned that we're shoving it under the rug and going on as the day goes by. And I'm concerned, I'd like to know a little more, if you can put it up on your website, about the high assay, low enriched uranium coming here from Russia for us to reprocess to make fuel modular, small modular reactors. I'm concerned about all of that, and we're not getting the answers that we need.
Hey, Vina, you have about
Uh-huh.
30 seconds left if there's anything else you want to add.
When are we going to have a real public meeting and tell the public the truth, what's going on out there? And I don't see how we can revitalize this site and put other industry out there as you guys want to, because this whole site, on-site and off-site, is contaminated with transuranics, plutonium, neptunium. They never addressed the air monitor out here in Otway, 14 miles from the plant, has neptunium and americia, same as the Pike County or the Zones Corner School that was shut down. We have other schools in that pathway that are not being addressed. Anna White knew, and she got fired because she was trying to help the community here. They got rid of her, but we still have these off-site monitors that's not being addressed.
Hey,
And
Vina,
I want to know what they're going to do about the groundwater. How are we going to monitor the groundwater that you've
hey,
already?
Vina, that's your 4 minutes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Hey, your voice sounds much better. Sound much stronger tonight. I'm glad you're doing well.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for your
Thank you.
comments. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
All right, Dr. Menuda, let's take a second and see if we can get this worked out. We want to hear from you if at all possible. And I apologize for nearly overlooking you. So we've sent you a request to unmute, and you should. All right, so he's unmuted. Are you there, sir? So I see David's provided some comments, but we'll give him a second just to see if he can unwork his. I see he's working with Charles Love, trying to access his microphone to make sure it's going to be good for him. Dr. Menuda, are you having any luck? I know this can be frustrating, and I apologize. For the record, Dr. Menuda has added to the chat that as a follow-up to Ms. Colley's comments, Vina's public comment, that plutonium-241 undergoes a beta decay to americium-241, the gamma emitter. Also, americium-241 undergoes an alpha decay to neptunium-237, a long-lived isotope on the order of 2 million years. All right, Dr. Menuda, one last try. Still have you unmuted on our end. We're just not picking you up. We'll give it just a second, see if we can get this worked out. If not, we'll have to we'll catch you on our next go around, unfortunately. Not unfortunately, we'll catch you. Unfortunately, we didn't catch you tonight. That's what I meant to say, just so that's clear. All right, Dr. Menuda, if it's okay, if you have thoughts you want to add, if you could please submit those in writing. I know you've done that to us in the past, and we can make that work. And sorry this didn't we couldn't get the connection right, so you could come through. We would have liked to have heard what you had to say. One last call. Is there anyone else that would like to participate in the public comment portion of tonight's meeting? All right, seeing none other than Dr. Menuda, who we weren't able to connect with, um, why don't we call it a night, guys? I appreciate your patience and your understanding. We appreciate your willingness to submit your questions, and you guys ask great questions tonight, good, relevant questions that are important to know the answer to. So look for answers on the portsvirtualevent.com website by October 22nd. You have additionally, you can access the Pegasus, which is the informational data site, is on the that website as well. There's a link to that, so you can check out some of that information. And we look forward. This is not the last time we're going to get together like this, and hopefully sometime in the near future we can get together in person. But we will be back together soon, and we will go from there. Thank you for your time and your attendance, and we look forward to talking to you in the near term. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great night.